Secure.
Most security programs treat all data the same. Protect everything and lock it all down. That sounds responsible, but it's actually how you end up spending a fortune protecting things that don't matter while leaving the things that do matter exposed. And it's because you've burned out yourself, your team, and your budget trying to protect everything. I believe there's a better way for us to think about this. In the first two episodes of this series, we looked at data sovereignty from two angles: where your data physically lives and what your contracts actually say about who controls it. Both of those conversations assume something worth stepping back to examine. That sovereignty is binary. Either you have full control or you don't. The reality is more nuanced than that, and more useful. Not every piece of data your organization touches carries the same risk if it's exposed, unavailable, or ends up in the wrong hands. The question isn't just, do we control this data? It's, how much control does this particular data actually require? That's the framework this episode is about. A practical three-tier model for classifying your data so that you can apply the right level of protection to the right things and stop wasting resources protecting things that simply don't warrant it. Here's the problem with treating all data equally. It makes security expensive, rigid, and ultimately unsustainable. When everything is treated as critical, nothing is. Teams burn out, applying maximum effort to control systems and datasets that would barely register if they were breached. Meanwhile, the genuinely sensitive assets, the ones that could actually threaten the organization if exposed, gets lost in the noise. This is a common failure mode. I've seen it firsthand at leadership level. An organization invests heavily on perimeter security, passes every compliance audit, and then suffers a significant breach through a data set that nobody thought to classify as sensitive because it didn't fit neatly into existing compliance categories. Compliance frameworks are useful. They establish a floor, but they are written to be general enough to apply to every organization in a sector, which means that they're almost never specific enough to capture what actually is most critical to your organization in particular. The classification you need is not one that your auditor checks, it's one that your leadership actually builds a decision around. Let's walk through the three tiers and what they actually mean in practice. Tier 1 is your mission-critical sovereign data. This is small, hardcore, the data that, if it disappeared tomorrow or showed up on a competitor's server next week, would threaten the organization at an existential level. For a manufacturer, that's your formulas and processes and your intellectual property. For a technology company, it's your source code and your authentication infrastructure that controls access to everything else. For a professional services firm, it may be client data that carries the most sensitive legal and financial exposure. The right home for Tier 1 is on-premises infrastructure that you own, can physically access, can audit without asking anybody's permission. Not because the cloud can't protect it, but because the control question is too important to outsource. This is the data where the answer to what happens if my vendor account is suspended, hacked, or goes out of business cannot be I lose access to the thing that runs my business. Tier 2 is your sensitive, controlled hybrid. This is a middle tier, data that needs real protection but doesn't have to live on hardware that you own. Well-structured private cloud or dedicated hosted environment with strong contractual controls, verified encryption standards, and audible access logs is appropriate here. The key word is verified, not assumed, not implied by a marketing page. The controls you think are in place need to be documented in the contract and independently validated on schedule, not just certified by the vendors themselves. This is also the tier where your contract review habits from episode 2 directly apply, because Tier 2 data is exactly what ends up quietly sitting in the AI training agreements and cross-border data transfers when terms update and nobody's watching. Tier 3 is your operational, this is standard cloud type data. This is the tier where the cloud cost and convenience argument actually holds up. Low sensitivity operational data your marketing collateral, your published content, your general collaborative workplace is generally appropriate for commodity cloud infrastructure, and you should use it there without guilt. The mistake isn't using the cloud for Tier 3. The mistake is not having a Tier 1 and a Tier 2 to prevent Tier 3 thinking from being applied uniformly to everything. Here's the idea I want you to take away from this. Data classification is not a compliance exercise, it's a clarity exercise. When you sit down and actually answer the question, which data, if lost or exposed, genuinely threaten the organization, you learn something that no security tool can tell you, what you're actually protecting and why. Most organizations skip that exercise because it's uncomfortable. It requires leadership to make explicit decisions about what matters most. It surfaces disagreements about risk tolerance. It exposes gaps between what people assumed was being protected and what actually is. The conversations are hard. They're also the most valuable thing a leadership team can do in the context of data security, because every subsequent decision about tools, vendors, and infrastructure flows from whether you've answered that question clearly. The three-tiered framework is a structure for having that conversation. The specific labels don't matter. What matters is someone in your organization is named what's in each tier, owns the answer, and revisits it when the business changes. If you've never done that exercise, that's where this session is pointing. Not towards a product, not towards a vendor, towards one conversation that most security spending is trying to avoid having. If this kind of clear-eyed look at the topics the technology industry doesn't want you thinking too hard about is useful to you, please subscribe. For the next episode, we're closing out the Data Sovereignty series with something that's happening right now, and most companies are completely unprepared for it. Your data is actively being used to train AI models, and in many cases, you've already agreed to it without actually realizing it. That's an episode worth coming back for.
System breach detected. Initializing defense protocols. Secure.